Hello, and welcome to the National D-Day Memorial, our book club today. I'm John Long, the Director of Education here at the Memorial. Our president, April Cheek-Messier,
Hi, everyone.
is going to join in the discussion. Before we get started with our book, however, let me give you a reminder of our next upcoming event, Lunchbox Lecture Online, which is Thursday, the 18th at noon, and it will feature, once again, April speaking on flight nurses of World War II, Angels of the Air, and the very important and unsung role that nurses on airplanes played, which is one of the great success stories of World War II. But I won't give away your pitch.
Pioneering women. That's what's it's a wonderful story.
Yes. It is, and so you want to be here on the 18th for that, and check our webpage for other upcoming events, lunchbox lectures, and various programs that are going on, because in this age of pandemics, when we can't do all the in-person things we used to, we've got a lot of virtual programs to offer, and very interesting ones too, if I can say so. But today we're here to discuss a book, and in our various book clubs we've never done a work of fiction until today. All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. And I will say, when April suggested this book, I thought, well, I don't read a lot of fiction. I read nonfiction as a rule. And she said, so yeah, that might be interesting. I've heard of the book. It's a Pulitzer Prize winner, but had not read it because, again, I just don't read a lot of novels. And as I kind of read the back cover blurb and thought, okay, this is going to be about a German soldier who befriends a blind French girl, and that's going to be the main focus. And I was sort of surprised as I read that for 98% of the book, they're nowhere near each other. They're on these kind of converging courses. And then maybe it's a spoiler alert to say they only spend, 2-3 hours, an afternoon together. And then, but the way the story is spun, I think, is very interesting. So All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. And I'll start ask April a question. A lot of characters to keep straight.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So now that's a tough question. And before we jump in, let me just mention a little bit about the author, because I think he's got a very interesting story too. And that'll give me some time to think about your question, because I like all the characters. But at any rate, now Anthony Doerr is the author of the book. And I thought it was interesting. He was born in 1973. And he grew up in a home where there were lots of books everywhere. His father ran a small printing company, but he recalls being read to by his mother all of the time. And he was particularly fond of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, which I also really enjoy. And it sparked a lifelong interest in him for writing and really the magic of words. And I think one of the things that's really wonderful about this book, he truly does seem to have just a way with words. Everything's very precise and very meaningful, and we'll kind of talk more about that. But at any rate, just a little bit more about Doerr. He attended Bowdoin College. It was a private liberal arts college in Maine. He majored in history, and he returned to Ohio to earn his master's of fine arts degree at Bowling Green State University. Like John said, he had written a few short stories, really collections, prior to writing this book, which he published in 2014. And it was written over a 10-year period. So a lot of love and attention went into this book, which I think really shows. And of course, was a Pulitzer Prize winning book for fiction. It won a number of other awards, and it reached the top of the New York Times bestseller list and remained a bestseller for 134 straight weeks. Not surprising, I think, once you read the book. And from what I understand, there are film rights for All the Light We Cannot See were acquired by 20th Century Fox in 2015. So maybe there'll be a movie at some point, which I think would be fascinating. But okay, your question. Let me see. Well, I think all of us who've read the book, we probably all have characters that stand out. And I have to say, there are parts of each character's stories and their personalities that I love, really, with all of them. Probably for me, I really loved Marie Lore. I mean, I just
She's the blind girl.
Exactly. And so much of the story really revolves obviously around her. I just admired her immensely, and just trying to put oneself in her shoes of not only living in this very perilous time, being with her father as they basically make their way out of Paris and Saint-Malo and trying to find refuge and everything that she went through, and then knowing that she could not see. And I think you experience the story in a very different way because of that. I mean, I felt like I did. You weren't so reliant. You looked at things differently because you knew she could not see. And so there was that whole element, another texture of things that, just as she walks to the ocean and you can kind of sense the ocean yourself, you're experiencing it like she did. And I think that was brilliant on his part to be able to do that.
I agree. And her dad was, I thought, a very interesting character because you mentioned their flight from Paris.
Yes.
And he's carrying potentially some very precious cargo. Again, I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but he raised her to be so independent. He built a model of Paris so that she could, feel where she was and then relate that to 3 dimensions as she walks the streets of Paris. And yet, if you pay attention as they are fleeing, he's so protective of her and not telling her what's happening and how much danger they're in. And I thought that was an interesting dichotomy, that he makes her so independent, but hides the truth from her.
Yeah.
You have a certain light that she cannot see.
True. That's right. That's right. Which is a constant theme throughout the book. And I think, other characters, I think, like that. Madame Menech, I think, was a great example of someone who, she looked at reality. She wasn't trying to hide from what was happening. And at 76 years old, decided that she was going to do something. She wasn't going to sit by and just not do anything. And so it was really great to see her character unfold as she really decided more and more to risk her life and really make a difference and do something as part of the resistance. And I love how she said she felt more alive than ever.
Right.
Really, it was a sense of renewal for her, that at that age, she felt like she was more alive than she'd ever been by doing that. So really loved her. How about you? What was your favorite character? And please chime in on our chat feature. We'd love to hear some of your thoughts and maybe some of your favorite characters and any questions you have to add to the discussion. I'd love to have your input. But
absolutely,
who did you enjoy reading?
Well, I'm going to take it a different direction. Not a favorite character because he's the villain of the story, but the German officer who and again, I don't want to give away a whole lot of the plot, but another character that never speaks is the Sea of Flames, a mysterious diamond that is part of the plot. And the legend is that whoever has this diamond is immortal, but terrible things will happen to the people around you. It's sort of a quick synopsis of it.
Yes.
And von Rumpel is a German officer whose task is to find gems because, of course, Nazi Germany was seizing artwork and treasures and historical objects. And he is supposed to be looking for these gems. And as the story progresses, it's clear that he is ill. And I was trying to figure out, is he after this mysterious diamond for the Third Reich or to save himself?
Yes.
And I don't know that he even knew necessarily. I don't know if there's an answer to it. But I found his character very interesting. Again, he's the villain, so you can't say he's my favorite. But
no, but it did
it's
add
well crafted.
Interesting. I mean, I think the whole idea of the Sea of Flames added a whole nother element to the story that really was very interesting as well. I mean, you had, I guess I wonder for everybody what that meant to you in the story. It was just kind of another way of leading these characters, I think, into their destiny in a way. I mean, the Sea of Flames in a way symbolized our that we have free will in our lives, or that we are destined, in the same way that at first it seems like Relor's father doesn't believe in the curse of the diamond, and yet he seems to be doing everything possible to make sure that it stays with her because it will protect her, knowing that it may cost him his life. So it's an interesting thing, is that are we destined? Are there things in our lives that are beyond our control, like a world war, when you no longer are able to control certain circumstances in your life, or can you? I mean, so I think the Sea of Flames really raises all those interesting very thought-provoking questions that I don't think any of us really have an answer to. But it does certainly add, I think, to the story. So he was a very frightening but interesting character, because it also just seems like, also in these situations, are you driven by, what drives you in your behavior? And I think you see that a lot in the relationship between Frederick and Werner. The young man in the story, the German boy who's with the Nazi army, and who basically he makes choices too,
or avoids making choices.
Makes it. Yes, okay. I think that's right.
Versus Frederick, his friend, who is very bookish and is not the typical Nazi stooge.
Yes,
and makes some major sacrifices as well. His character, I thought, was, I would like to hope was very realistic. I don't know, there were a lot of Fredericks in the Third Reich.
Right.
But yeah, for a fictional character, I found him compelling.
Yes, and you have to believe, I would want to believe that perhaps there were who just could not give up that, he was determined not to deviate from what was in his soul, really. What was right. He was going to take whatever it took. He had that moral courage to say, this does not feel right, and I'm not going to do that. And I think that powerful example of the prisoner at when they're at the training center at Schubfortha, where they take the prisoner out and they have to each beat this prisoner, and he refuses to do it. He refuses to pour ice cold water on this prisoner and take part. Werner does, and I think it really does show you do have choices, even in those situations. And Werner chose to go along with the others. Yeah, so
go along to get along.
Yes, yes, and even the moment, and then you're right. This is why I really do love Frederick's story, his character. Even those moments when he tells Werner, maybe we shouldn't be friends anymore. He's trying to protect Werner,
right?
So that he is not picked on or harassed because of their friendship. And so that's powerful. I mean, Frederick certainly made those choices, and it cost him very dearly, but he could, at the end, he stuck to, he wasn't severed from his soul, so to speak. He was, he
redeems himself.
And
again, don't want to give away too much of the ending for anyone that hasn't read it, but.
Yes, we're trying not to do that, but it's very hard. Please read the book. Yeah.
And one of the comments come up that's another, not really a character, but sort of a character, is the force of radio.
Yes.
In fact, I would contend that is actually the light that you cannot see.
True. Yes.
Is radio and what it means to different characters.
Yes, I think obviously that's a huge part of the book, and I think it's a connecting point between Marie-Laure and Werner, because really what connects them to the outside world and this larger world that they're a part of, it's the radio. It's Anutha, who is Werner's sister, is the same way. They start out with that an illegal little radio that he puts together, and they listen to these broadcasts. And in fact, that's where Werner first hears Marie-Laure's grandfather's voice as a scientist, or as I guess he was
science teacher,
discussing these things, and it really connects them to the outside world in a way that is, I think, very powerful. And in the end, again, try not to give anything away, but I think all that comes full circle for Werner, where he makes different choices at the end that do display a lot of moral courage there toward the end of the story. So that's pretty powerful. But you're right. And I'd be curious if anybody else felt like, with the title, All the Light We Cannot See, what that meant to you. What is the light that we cannot see? Is it the radio, those millions of transmissions and the kind of opening up of the world in that way? For me, I felt like part of it too, I think that's literally what the author meant. For me, I also felt like it was a lot of all of these stories. And I think, I'm like you. I tend to read anything World War II, but not a lot of fiction related to the war. And so I love this book. But part of what really brings this book to life, I think, is just the fact that we know that there's all these little stories just like this out there that we may never know. Real, true stories, that we'll never know. And I think that's what's so powerful about this. And, for me, that's all the light that we cannot see, is that there's all these stories that we all want to be able to hear and know and understand from all these different perspectives, whether you were a German boy, a young French girl, whoever you were, to know those stories, and that these exist, and we'll never know what they are. To me, it was a little bit more metaphorical, but
this is from one of the professor's radio broadcasts that Werner and Jutta listened to. What do we call visible light? We call it color. But the electromagnetic spectrum runs to 0 in one direction and infinity in the other. So really, children, mathematically, all of light is invisible. And of course, included in that electromagnetic spectrum is radio waves.
Yes.
That for Werner, so exciting, and for a while you almost think it's going to be liberating, and then it almost becomes imprisoning for him, as his job with the German army is to find illegal radio broadcasts. But then comes back, I think it brings it back to what he wants to do, what he knows he should do, and he uses his expertise in radio to shield Laura.
Yes, and eventually save her life.
And save her life, exactly.
Which again is very powerful.
Spoiler alert.
I know, spoiler alert. Yeah, there's a point where Frederick, going back to Frederick and Werner, where Frederick says, "Your problem, Werner, is you still believe in your own life." What did you think about that? I thought that was a very powerful.
I think that must have been a very common sentiment of people in World War II, because especially in Europe, where the battle is right there in your backyard, your life is being driven by things so much out of your control. Whether you are a peasant in Russia, or someone in China, or a German like Werner, or a French person like Laura. Frederick is wise beyond his years, I think.
Yes. Oh, yes.
In recognizing that things are just beyond our control, but I'm going to stay true to what I believe.
And Jutta, Werner's sister, is the same way, because she says at one point, and I can't remember the exact phrase, but is it right to do things just because everybody else is doing it?
Yes.
I mean, again, wise beyond their years, and he thinks back on that phrase a lot as he's older, because I really think Werner, of course, I think he thought he was bettering his life. I think he lied to himself a lot, and like many people probably did, that he was going to have a better life because he was going to not be in the mines the way his father had been and killed in the mines, that he was going to be a scientist in Berlin. And I think he really believed in that. And I think that was what,
And I'm just doing what I have to do.
Yes.
I would not choose to be
perhaps
finding resistance radios and leading to these people's deaths in one case. Actually very painful, event where some people are killed as a result of, not directly a result of his actions, but something that I think that pains him a great deal.
Oh, it does. I think so. I would ask you all this too, because again, there's so many powerful quotes throughout this book. Doerr, I think, he's very poetic as he's writing, and there's oftentimes entire phrases where you just have to stop and kind of take it in and think about how that applies, not only in the book, but even to our own lives and situations. But there's something that Madame Mennick says when she's talking to Etienne, and she says, "Doing nothing is as good as collaborating." And again, that's one of those moments where you stop and you think about that, and just in terms of our everyday lives. I mean, not just in terms of World War II, but that's a very powerful statement. And I think for Madame Mennick, the answer was obvious. She was going to do something because she didn't want to stand by, and she knew the risk was enormous. But and we see that with Frederick. But I think, again, just a very
I think Doerr has captured something, that a pressure that a lot of Europeans must have felt.
Yes.
Because if you're in France, occupied by Germany, you obviously you want to do something, but there's a great risk to it. And I know that a lot of French people have struggled with that, to the point that so many French people will say they were in the resistance, and maybe they didn't do anything more than
Right.
give a German soldier bad directions on the street.
Right. Right.
But at least I did something.
To do something.
Yeah.
And I think not just those who were French, there were many Germans who felt certainly that they perhaps, didn't have a choice. And you have to think about, if we were in that situation, would we have risked it all? Because you weren't just risking your own personal safety, you were risking your family's safety to do something like what Madame Manic was doing. I think that's a tough question, because I don't know that any of us really know that until you're in a situation like that. But we'd like to be able to say yes. We would all take whatever risk we could to contribute to those resistance efforts, and but that's a hard thing to say if you had a family, if you were trying to survive.
Do you remember Von Rumpel was at the museum? He's trying to find out where this mysterious diamond has gone, and he's pressuring the director, and I forget the two characters. But how's he doing? It's by threatening their families.
Yes, that's right.
And they end up, revealing information that they didn't want to, because what risk are you going to take? I'll risk my life,
right?
But my son's, my daughter's life, that's another matter.
That's a whole other matter. And so I think there's a lot of empathy I have for some of these characters like Werner when you're reading that. Is something to certainly things to think about. And I think at the end of the story, and again, we hate to give away too much, but Werner's sister, again at the end, seems very guilt-ridden herself. She seems to have that weight of
as a German,
of everything that had happened, and it's interesting to me to read that, and because that really resonated with me. My uncle was German, and he used to tell me all the time that he had this tremendous, and he was just he came along shortly after the war, so he wasn't even born yet, but he felt so much guilt for what had happened, and being German, he felt guilty for what had taken place, and we used to talk about it quite a bit, and so that really resonated with me. Her really just not talking about it, when Volkheimer comes to talk to her, she's very reluctant to even look at the bag that was Werner's bag, or to look at any of that.
Volkheimer is one of Werner's fellow soldiers who survives the war and struggles with his own guilt, I think.
Yes. So it's just that, again, some powerful moments there that, which, by the way, did you like how the author kind of fast forwarded toward the end? Did you like that addition? I'd be curious to see how anyone who read the book, if you liked
I did.
that.
I didn't really expect it. So it was in with the war.
Yes.
And the very last part kind of brings it up to the present.
Yeah.
And mentions that Marie Laure is still living in Paris, at that point, 70 years after the end of the war. And I wondered, is that because of the Sea of Flames?
That's right. Exactly.
She's still alive, 100 years later. Because, but and Volkheimer, incidentally, I wondered, does he have his redemptive moments? Because he is
that's true. That's true.
So in many ways the true believer in Nazism, the dedicated soldier, could be bloodthirsty, and doing his job. He would say, I'm just doing my duty.
That's right.
But toward the end of the story, really saves Werner. You can make the argument.
That's right.
Without giving away too much of why. And by saving Werner, unknowingly saves Marie Laure, because Werner goes on to find her. And then many years later, in the 1974, Werner's the one that somewhat makes amends. And I think that's, again, is a pressure a lot of Germans have had to deal with in the generation since the war. Did I do enough? Can I do anything now to make up for the crimes of my nation back then? So,
and I think, and some of our viewers agree here, that really tied it up. I think tied the story up with someone who, they obviously like that. And I agree. I do think, and I think the only thing I wanted to know, I think this is a mark of a good book, is I wanted to know more. I didn't want it to end. I mean, it's what, 500 pages. I think I wasn't quite ready for it to end. I forgot how many pages there, but it's long.
Yes.
It didn't feel long.
It's not a hard read.
No,
Don't be discouraged if it's that big.
No, it's a fantastic read, but it's, I wanted to know more. And I really found myself in those conversations with, like Volkheimer and Jutta, that I wanted to, I wanted it to be more in depth. I wanted them to have longer conversations, and the same thing with Marie Lohr. Again, when she goes to visit, I think she was visiting Jutta at the end as well. Or is that correct? No, let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Anyway, I wanted those conversations to be longer, more in depth about the relationship, or those brief few hours. But then again, it was more believable that it wasn't.
Right. Yes, when older Marie Lohr meets Jutta in Paris.
Yeah.
What would that conversation be? For
exactly.
A German she was no Nazi.
Right.
Right. She was opposed to everything. But here is someone who was obviously a victim of Germany.
Right.
And I think she mentions that she felt uncomfortable.
Yes.
There in Paris, because even though the war is by then over 30 years, it's still I'm German.
And I think I think it was much more believable that way. So my selfishness, I wanted more, but at the same time, I don't think it was talked about a great deal. I think they really did try to not dredge up the past, so to speak, and think on it, because it was too painful. I think it was still very raw emotion that they were dealing with all those years later. And I think he expresses that very well in characters like Volkheimer and others at the end. So
I've had the experience, that probably you have too, of being with American veterans of World War II and a German veteran in the same room, and able to talk and share and put the past behind them, because I think they also kind of think this was beyond our control.
That's right.
We were just dragged along in this, and I think you saw that after the Civil War, when Northern and Southern soldier veterans could come together
so many years later
and shake hands at reunions and say, the past is the past, and we need to move on.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'd be curious what you all think, and again, chime in, anyone watching, but what you thought the moral of the story is. What is our lesson here? I think there are a lot, really. I think it's kind of hard to sum it up with one lesson. I think for me, I think a lot of it was just I go back to Madame Mennick and this idea of, don't be a bystander, do something, in whatever situation, do the right thing. I think you see that crop up over and over again, I think, throughout the story. And all these intersecting lives, you see that. And sometimes our indifference, by being indifferent to whatever the situation is, we are adding to the problem. We're not helping solve it, and it can get worse and spiral out of control. And I think we all have to have a voice. And so to me, that was a very powerful message there throughout the book. But I think there are many. I mean, I think everybody probably takes away a different moral lesson in this as well. So did you have any other?
No, I'd agree with that. Although at the same time, it would be hard to fault some of the French neighbors in Saint-Malo who weren't involved in this sense, because, again, what choice would we make in that circumstance? We've never had to answer that for ourselves.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't suggest that if you didn't do anything that made you a bad person by any stretch.
Yes. Is Werner a bad person, or just someone caught in impossible choices?
Well, and I think that's where I think the book is so moving, is that you look at somebody like Werner and Frederick, and you think, and all the others really, and you think, what could they have been had this war not come along? If things would, if this had not happened, you think about the gifts and the talents. Frederick would have been some great bird enthusiast. Yes, he probably written many books, I'm sure, about that. And Werner probably would have been a world-renowned scientist. Who knows? And it really makes you think about, with all those who were lost during World War II, what did we lose and not even know? the talent of all of these people. I think that is really overwhelming at times when you read that, and that we'll never know. We'll never know what gifts were lost during the war. So that's pretty powerful as well. Did you like?
It puts their sacrifice more in perspective, because
it does.
they give up. The men on the beach at Omaha who died gave up not just their life that moment, but all the future years, for us to live free and be able to discuss books on the internet.
On a virtual platform, which I think Werner would love.
Werner would be very interested in this technology.
That's right. And we have someone who says you have choices, and not doing something is a choice. And that's correct.
Very often.
That's very true. A couple of other quick questions, and we'll wrap up. And please let us know if you all have any other thoughts or questions as well. But did you I was curious. So I didn't hate this, but I don't know. I wonder if the book would have been just as strong without doing this. You notice that Doerr really kind of moves us throughout the book in different time periods. We start out in one year, but we move quickly to a few years earlier, and then we move back. So we're kind of moving back and forth. It's not chronological. Now, for me, sometimes that was difficult because I kind of like things in a chronology. Having said that, I
kept me on my toes.
Yes,
Then say, "Well, wait a minute, when is this?" Oh, okay, and then
it was an interesting technique.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a way I would write the book, but I think he pulls it off. And it might be off-putting to some readers, but again, to me, it made sure I was focusing and then remembering and maybe linking chapter 42 with chapter 16. It's okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So it didn't bother me, but I could see how that might put off some readers.
That's true.
Who like more of a sequential narrative flow.
Yeah. Having said that, I think the way he writes his chapters was very smart, because they're very short, they're very succinct, and so you move through that pretty quickly. And I thought the irony when he starts the very first chapter is about the leaflets being dropped. Evacuate now. It's very short, just like the leaflets were. We're to the point, very concise, and that's how his chapters move. It kind of sets the tone, I think, for the whole book. So and
that's it, because that is the first chapter, but then I didn't even think about that.
No. You kind of go back and
20% of the book.
Right. So he really uses some great techniques in his writing. Very scientific. A lot of, I think, reading his bio and understanding that he really obviously his knowledge of science is there, and then intertwining that into his very poetic use of language is really wonderful. So I would
another mark of a book that you enjoy is that you go to learn more. And I do recall stopping and going to look up the city of Saint Malo, which is its own character in many ways. And how much of the story is true, and it's pretty accurate the description. So
very much so.
Certainly know a lot more about Saint Malo than I did before I read the book.
And there's so much great symbolism there too, with the Marie Laure's the wooden houses, the small fragile houses that her father built for her, and then
so she could find her way around the town.
Yes, that's right.
And memorize the town, and then
how they're really crushed. That was kind of crushed at the end. It was damaged, of course, and I really think about again the impact on these cities who had so much damage at the end of the war, so much history that was lost in many cases, but still standing. And also one other thing I'll just mention that I do love the connection at the end with Marie Laure, and she used to go into that grotto, that little area of Saint Malo, and she loved the mollusk, the little, and it would end up eventually being basically a scientist who studied mollusks. But just the symbolism there.
I like that too. I have a daughter that loves snails.
Well, see,
always tries to catch snails.
And when you think about them and why she really loved them so much, you think about how they endured. You think about them on that grotto, on that wall, and they, as the city above them is probably being bombed and burned, and they're still there, and they have that hard shell. They're tenacious. They withstood it, and so did Marie Laure, and ends up becoming a scientist who studies them. I love that. So a lot of neat connections throughout. So And we have someone who said, can't wait to read it. And we do highly encourage.
Absolutely. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out it is available in the National D-Day Memorial Gift Shop.
Right. We do want to mention that. And I guess I'd say, does anybody have any questions? I don't see any. Is there anything else you want to add, John? I mean, I love the book.
What's our next book we're going to talk about?
Oh, let's see. It's this summer.
It is, yes. I forget the date. Maybe we look it up
We'll have
quickly.
to look
But
at that one.
yeah, it's actually a children's book.
That's right.
One of the Magic Treehouse books that deals with D-Day.
Yes.
Let's go in a different direction instead of adult nonfiction or adult fiction. In this case, we will talk about a kid's book, because if we do nothing at the National D-Day Memorial but help to inspire next generation of World War II buffs, we'll be doing our job.
That's right.
So that's coming up in June. I don't know the exact date, but it's on our webpage.
We'll have it on the webpage, or already do, I think. And I think children's World War II literature, to me, it's fascinating how many books have been written about World War II, and there's still so much out there to be written. You know, you would think we could probably stack books to the moon on histories of World War II, and yet there's still so much untapped history. And so I think this book is a prime example of that.
And Jack and Annie are great.
And Jack and Annie are great characters, so I think you'll love that book. And we
have both read this book and so many other Magic Treehouse books for our kids.
Yeah, fantastic. So definitely keep that in mind. And then if you all have any suggestions for books you would like us to have a book club discussion on, please let us know. We welcome any suggestions on that. But if you have not read it, great book to take to the beach, read wherever you are. Wonderful, wonderful read. Anthony Doerr did a great job. I hope there's a movie, and look forward to seeing his.
The movie won't be as good as the book.
I don't think so. But I think the book is fantastic. It'll be hard to beat, but all right. Well, I think with that, I think that wraps up today's book discussion. So stay tuned for more of these and our upcoming lecture next week. And we thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.